Get everybody out now. Officer David Lim, Port Authority Police Department, page 35. As office workers scrambled down the stuffy, crowded stairway of 1WTC, Port Authority Police Officer David Lim was advancing up the steps with one thought in mind: get everybody out now. Seeing those heading in the opposite direction, he knew the situation was getting worse the higher he climbed. More people were bleeding, more were burned, more were scared. Earlier that morning, Lim and his canine partner, Sirius, a specially trained bomb sniffing yellow Labrador retriever, had been randomly checking for explosives in vehicles entering one of the WTC's service ramps. During their break, the K9 team went to Lim's basement office underneath the South Tower. A veteran of 21 years on the force, Lim filled out paperwork while eating his usual breakfast of a bran muffin, banana, and coffee. At his feet, Sirius was devouring a bowl of dog food. Lim liked to call Sirius a big mush because the 4-year-old dog was so laid back. When on duty searching for explosives, Sirius, who wore badge 17, remained alert, working long hours without signs of boredom or fatigue. But when his job was done, he couldn't wait to curl up and nap in his cage in the office. At home, though, Sirius was simply the lovable family pet who slept in Lim's bedroom. At 8:46 a.m., a severe jolt shook Lim's office for several seconds. "What was that?" he asked Sirius. Seconds later, he heard over his radio that there had been an explosion on the upper floors of the North Tower. "Oh my God, Sirius, something got by us." Lim feared that a bomb laden package from a delivery truck had cleared their checkpoint and been taken to an upper floor where it had detonated. At the time, he wasn't aware that a jetliner had slammed into the tower. The impact had sparked a massive fire on the top floors and shot a fireball fed by jet fuel down a bank of elevators that flashed and burned on various levels all the way to the basement. Because Sirius was a bomb dog and not a search and rescue dog, Lim left him in his cage. "You'll be safer here," Lim told him, "and I'm going to help some people, but I'll come back for you later, I promise." Sirius looked up as if he understood. He then lay his head back down and watched his master charge out the door to assist in the evacuation. From an early age, helping people was what Lim always wanted to do. Born and raised in New York City, Lim, a first generation Chinese American, was inspired to become a cop after developing a bond with the officers of the 101st Precinct in Queens. They often ate at his immigrant parents' restaurant in Far Rockaway, Queens, where he worked after school. In 1980, he joined the Port Authority Police Department, PAPD, which was responsible for the public safety of the entire WTC complex. Remember, WTC is World Trade Center. On 9/11, members of the PAPD were the first of the first responders. After sprinting through the basement of the complex, Lim reached the plaza level of the North Tower. He saw hundreds of people, many of them women carrying their high heeled shoes, scrambling down the escalators and into the lobby. While Lim was directing the flow of office workers out of the building, he heard a high pitched scream. He wheeled around and saw on the plaza outside the remains of someone who had leaped from one of the upper floors. He dashed to the spot to investigate. Lim called his command desk, and while he was reporting the incident, another jumper fell right in front of him. "If I had been 10 feet closer, I would have been killed," he thought. Lim stared at the smoke belching from the top floors and told himself, Things must be really bad up there for them to be jumping. His heart ached for those people who felt so hopeless and desperate they were choosing to leap to their deaths rather than be burned alive. I know I can do good here on the plaza, helping evacuate people. But if others are thinking of jumping out of windows, they need my help upstairs. He had worked at the WTC for 16 of his 21 years on the force and knew all its nooks and crannies. It was like a second home to him. Leaving the evacuation to an NYPD officer, Lim entered the crowded stairwell A and started the strenuous climb toward the upper floors. He felt fortunate that he wasn't weighed down by all the gear and equipment that the firefighters carried. The only extra weight he had was a 15-pound gun belt. Adrenaline pumping through his 5'7" 175-pound frame spurred him up the steps. During his climb, he heard over his radio that the explosion had been caused by a plane that had crashed into the building. He felt a sense of relief that it wasn't a bomb that had slipped by Sirius in him. Lim assumed that a small private plane had accidentally hit the North Tower. Soon, a radio transmission reported the plane that struck the building was a jetliner and that the fire was spreading throughout the top 20 floors. The news hit him hard in the gut because first responders like him were now dealing with an emergency no one had ever faced before. Once concern he didn't have, one concern he didn't have that the tower would collapse. He knew the WTC structures were built to withstand a plane crash. Besides, he was at the scene in 1993 when terrorists tried but failed to bring down the North Tower. Back then, a powerful car bomb blew up in the underground garage, killing six and injuring more than 1,000 people. But the building still stood tall. While heading up the stairway, Lim passed office workers who didn't know why they were being evacuated. Taking up both sides of the stairway, they were annoyed that they had to make room for Lim. Why do we have to go down when you're going up? Someone asked him. Just keep going down, Lim said. Down is good, it's a good thing. But why are you going up? To tell people like you to keep going down. Moments later, his radio transmitted an ominous message. A plane has just hit 2 World Trade Center. Lim felt a surge of anxiety. We're not dealing with an accident, he thought. We're under attack. He lowered the volume on his radio so others in the stairway wouldn't hear it and panic. When he exited stairwell A on the 27th floor, Lim spotted a man in a wheelchair accompanied by a coworker. Do you need my help? Lim asked. No, the disabled man replied. We're just waiting for the other people to go down first so we don't get in their way. You need to get out right now, Lim urged. Seeing several firefighters who had emerged from the doorway of stairwell B, Lim told them about the man in the wheelchair. Someone needs to help him get out of here, he told them. Don't worry, replied one of the firefighters. We'll take care of him. On the floor, Lim was stunned to see office workers still at their desks, unaware of the danger and waiting for official instructions. He ordered them to leave immediately. Whatever you do, do not, I repeat, do not take the elevators. He was afraid that the building's elevators could be death traps in the fire. Figuring this might be his only chance for a break during the crisis, he used an office phone to call his wife, Diane. I'm in the North Tower, but I want you to know that I'm okay, he told her. I have to get as many people out of here as I can. Rather than return to stairwell A, he continued his climb via stairwell B. Now, He was seeing people who were dazed and bleeding, others whose skin and clothes were charred, believing there were more victims farther up who needed his help. He began enlisting people who weren't hurt. He grabbed fit men by the arm and matched up each of them with someone who was injured or burned. In each case, he ordered, take this person all the way down and go straight to the triage area. He was referring to the spot near the World Financial Center across the street where paramedics and EMTs were treating victims. To speed up the evacuation of the injured, Lim told them to ignore the single file line that was going down on the right and instead go on the left against the traffic of the climbing cops and firefighters because they would step aside. One man whom Lim had enlisted to escort a burn victim was hesitant about using the left side. I'll tell you what you do, said Lim. He looked down the stairway and bellowed, make way for the injured! Make way for the injured! Turning to the man, he said, just shout all the way down. Now go, go, go! Sweating and puffing, Lim arrived at the 44th floor and hurried into the sky lobby. He unlocked the emergency closets, which stored gear such as axes, oxygen tanks, and flashlights. He handed out the equipment to several fatigued firefighters who had dropped their gear on the way up to lighten their load on the strenuous climb. Suddenly, a thundering roar rocked the building. An unseen force blew out the south facing windows and knocked down Lim and everyone around him. When he scrambled to his feet, he thought, I don't know what just happened, but it must be bad. It feels like part of the building is collapsing. But no, it can't be. Everyone listen up, he ordered. We have to get out of here right now. He gathered the remaining office workers and herded them to stairwell B. Despite the urgency, he was pleased to see that most everyone remained relatively calm and quiet as they hurried down the stairs. There was little panic and little talk. The stairway's lights kept flickering, casting an eerie atmosphere on the emergency. When he heard a frightening message, Tower 2 is down. I repeat, Tower 2 is down. All units evacuate Tower 1 immediately. My God, the South Tower just fell? But that's impossible. This is the World Trade Center. Nothing can bring these buildings down. But the unbelievable had just happened. For the first time since the crisis began, Lim was genuinely scared. This building will probably come down too. As fast as he could, he helped clear each floor. Along the way, he and the firefighters were collecting the stragglers, those who were disabled, elderly, or overweight. Some of them deliberately were holding back so they wouldn't slow down the line. Lim would have none of that. Everybody goes now, he declared. Nobody waits. When he reached the 27th floor, Lim looked for the man in the wheelchair whom he had met on the way up. Lim was relieved he wasn't there. He must have made it out. Around the 21st floor, he came across Chief James Romito, Captain Kathy Mazza, and Lieutenant Robert Seary, all from the Port Authority Police Department. They were tending to a man who was having trouble breathing. Lim told the chief, You know, the South Tower collapsed. Romito grabbed his pager and read the message confirming what Lim had just said. Okay, let's get out of here. Ramito and Siri picked up the man under each arm and started down the stairs, followed by Mazza and Lim. The pace wasn't nearly as fast as Lim had hoped. Time is limited, and at this rate, I'm probably not going to make it, he fretted. It's going to come down while I'm still in it. When they arrived at the fifth floor, Lim saw Port Authority employee Josephine Harris sitting on the side of the landing while with several firefighters from Ladder 6 looking after her. People were stepping around her, including Romita, Maza, and Siri, with their ill victim. Lim learned that Josephine was too exhausted and in too much pain to go any further. She just wanted to be left behind so the rest could get out quicker. But the firefighters refused. One of the men told Lim that their captain, Jay Jonas, was on the fourth floor looking for a chair for her. There are no chairs on that floor, Lim said. It's a mechanical and equipment room. Come on, I'll help you with Josephine. He lifted her up by one arm while firefighters Tommy Falco took the other, and together they slowly headed down. From a few landings below, Mazza called up to him, "Leave the woman with the firefighters and come with us." "Go ahead, boss," he replied. "I'll be right behind you. I've already got her." It was the first time Lim had ever ignored a senior officer's command. He made it down only one more floor before the building began shaking and rumbling so violently that it knocked everyone off their feet. The North Tower was beginning to collapse. Lem and Falco covered Josephine with their bodies as the floor above fell one atop the other with increasing speed and intensity. Lem prepared himself for death. "I hope it's quick," he told himself. I don't want to be lying here trapped for days and then die." The screeching, thundering din was unlike anything he had ever heard before. As the collapsing floors tumbled closer and closer, he pictured in his mind his wife, Diane, and children, Michael and Deborah. He wanted the family to be his last thought on earth. Page 44, mid page. It was all over in 13 seconds. Lim and the others were now enveloped in a blanket of darkness, dust, and debris, and silence. At first he thought, "I must be dead." Then he coughed. Dead men don't cough. He couldn't see anyone because it was totally black. The dust was so thick that the only way he could breathe was by pulling his shirt over his face. Hacking away and fighting for a decent breath, Lim tried to gather his wits. "My God, I survived." Then Lim heard Captain Jonas call out, "Is everyone all right? Sound off." One by one, Lim, Josephine, and a dozen firefighters who were sprawled from the fifth floor down to the first answered the roll call. Lim waited to hear the voices of Mazza, Romito, and Siri. When he didn't, he hoped it was because they had fled the building in time. Meanwhile, firefighter Mickey Meldrum had fallen on a landing between what was left of the third and fourth floors. He found himself stuck on a small 1.5 foot wide chunk of concrete, his legs dangling over a space where steps used to be. Now it just looked like a dark hole. Meldrum complained that he couldn't feel his arms or legs. He felt dizzy, his head hurt, and his speech was slurred. He had the classic symptoms of a concussion. Firefighters tied a rope around Meldrum and attached it to a railing so he wouldn't slip off. To prevent him from losing consciousness or falling asleep, a medical concern for someone with a concussion, Lim kept talking to him, asking questions about family and work. Lim had another reason for carrying on a conversation. He was worried that he himself had a concussion too. Right after the collapse, Lim felt elated because he had survived a major catastrophe. But then he thought, how are we going to get out of here? He, like the others, wasn't sure how much of the building had collapsed. In the early minutes of their entombment, Jonas and Battalion Chief Rich Picciotto were sending out mayday calls on their radios and not getting any responses. But Lim eventually was able to reach the Port Authority's Central Command on his radio and tell them that he and 13 others were trapped in the rubble. When he was asked for their location, Lim used as a reference point the 25-foot tall bronze sphere which had stood in the plaza between the two towers. "Find the globe in the middle of the plaza and then go about 100 yards west and you'll run right into us," Lim said. The voice on the other end of the transmission said, "What globe? There is none." It had been smashed and buried under a mountain of debris. As the hours passed, Lim was wondering if any of the survivors would ever get out. Although cell phone service couldn't connect to phone numbers in the city, he got through to his wife, Diane, at their suburban home in Lynbrook, New York. He told her he was okay. Actually, he was nagged by the thought that rescuers might never find them, but he didn't want to alarm his wife. He just wanted to hear her voice, knowing that if he should die there, at least he had a chance to say goodbye to her first. Lim then handed the cell phone to the others so they could call their loved ones. Meanwhile, he worried about the fate of his partner, Sirius. Several times he radioed Central Command asking for somebody to check on his dog, but given the enormity of the situation, his request was low on the list of priorities for rescuers. To help shove aside thoughts of death, Lim, like many of the firefighters, focused on Josephine. They spent most of their time trying to keep her calm and comfortable. Their number one goal was to get her out of this tomb alive. 5 hours after the collapse, Lim and the others discovered a hole above the fifth floor landing that led to their freedom. Emerging into the daylight, Lim got his first look at the 16 acres of rubble of what had been two magnificent twin towers. He turned to Picciotto and said, "Chief, what do you think the chances of surviving something like this are?" "1 in a billion," Picciotto replied. 1 in a billion. After Lim helped Meldrum over the dangerous smoldering debris field, they were checked over by paramedics at the scene. Covered from head to toe in gray dust, Lim was in shock from his ordeal and feeling pain in his back and head, but he refused to go to the hospital. He first needed to find out if Sirius was okay. He walked towards 7 WTC and planned to enter the lower level and take the underground walkway to the basement of what was left of the South Tower. But 7 WTC was fully engulfed by flames and in danger of collapsing, which it did about 3 hours later. Firefighters stopped him, and one of them said, "You can't go in there." Lim replied, "I don't care. I need to get my dog." "They're looking at me like I'm crazy." "Well, I don't care how many firefighters there are. They're not going to stop me. I'm going in there." Seeing the determination on Lim's grim, encrusted face, the firefighter moved aside and said, "Okay, do what you have to do." As he started down the ramp, he was met by Port Authority cops Lieutenant Bill Dabrowski, Officer Aaron Greenstein, and Officer Bobby Greff. They were overjoyed that he was alive. "We were ready to report you dead," Dabrowski said. Despite Lim's pleadings to search for Sirius, they convinced him that it was impossible to reach the dog under all the debris. They put him in their car and drove him to the command post. When he walked inside, everyone stood up and cheered because he was the first Port Authority officer to have survived the collapse. Over the next 12 hours, fellow cops Will Jimeno and John McLaughlin, who had been outside the North Tower when it fell, would be pulled out of the rubble. Reluctantly, Lim agreed to be taken to St. Vincent's Hospital, where he was treated for leg and back injuries and a mild concussion. During his brief stay, he saw his wife and 2 children in an emotional reunion. "Where's Sirius?" his son Michael asked. "They'll get him as soon as they can," Lim replied. "I'm not hurt very bad." They have to rescue any survivors first. After a few hours at the hospital, Lim told his family, "I'm not hurt very bad. I should go home and free up the hospital bed for all the victims coming in." Michael looked out the window and said, "What victims?" Outside, doctors and nurses were milling around, waiting for ambulances that never came. Although Lim knew some of the injured were taken to hospitals closer to WTC, he expected many to arrive at St. Vincent's. Then it dawned on him: you either made it out safely or you were dead. Against his doctor's wishes, Lim checked himself out of the hospital and went home with his family. Later that night, Diane told him, "Maybe I should stay up and keep a watch on you." "Don't worry," he replied. "I'm not going to sleep." He was too keyed up after all that he had gone through, so he spent most of the night watching news coverage of the catastrophe. While slowly recovering at home, Lim yearned for word that Sirius had been found alive. He knew it would take a miracle. He also knew miracles happen, having experienced one with 13 others in Stairwell B. But when a week went by without any news on Sirius's fate, Lim was forced to accept the cold, hard truth. His loyal partner and beloved pet was dead. Although Lim was heartbroken, the dog's death was far overshadowed by the human tragedy of 9/11 and by his own incredible survival. For Lim, the miracle of Stairwell B strengthened the faith that he and his family shared. A case in point: on the morning of the attack, shortly after Lim first called Diane to tell her he was helping evacuate people out of the North Tower, she watched TV in horror as the building collapsed. Trembling in grief, she called her father, Robert Glaser, in West Virginia, and cried, "I think I've lost my husband." Glaser, a Presbyterian minister, told her, "I'll get in touch with my congregation and we'll pray for him." An hour later, Lim called Diane from Stairwell B, telling her he had survived the collapse and was waiting to be rescued. Diane immediately called her father. Upon hearing the amazing news, her relieved dad told her, "I've seen prayer work before, but never this fast." The Port Authority Police Department suffered the greatest single-day loss of life in law enforcement history on 9/11. 37 officers from every rank were killed at the WTC. Among them were David Lim's 3 senior officers, whom he insisted go ahead of him down Stairwell B: Chief James Romito, Captain Kathy Mazza, and Lieutenant Robert Seary. An additional 47 Port Authority civilians employees died in the attack. "I knew about half of those who were killed," Lim says. "I had survivor's guilt because some of the people I urged to go in front of me died. Time heals all wounds, but it leaves a lot of scars." 6 weeks after the terrorist attack, Lim returned to work part-time. 3 months later, on January 22nd, 2002, he received a phone call that researchers had located Sirius's remains. The dog was found under his master's spare shirt that had fallen off a hook in his office when the building collapsed. The evidence indicated that Sirius had died instantly. The remains were already in a body bag when Lim arrived at the scene. He chose not to view the body because he wanted to remember Sirius the way he was when he was alive. Before the dog was removed from the area, they summoned a priest who said a prayer about all creatures great and small. Then, in the same ritual accorded a deceased firefighter or police officer, an American flag was draped over the body bag. As Sirius's remains were brought out, the workers stopped, lined up, and saluted the dog. Accompanied by Lim, The body was taken in a Port Authority Emergency Services vehicle to Bellevue Hospital for an autopsy. On the way there, the truck drove past the various Port Authority police commands, where officers stood outside and saluted in honor of the only canine to die at the WTC. When Lim was given Sirius's flag at Bellevue, he broke down and cried. Moments later, the medical examiner, who up until then had been analyzing human body parts for months without showing any emotion, couldn't restrain herself anymore. She wept openly for the first time after seeing the dog's remains. Sirius and I were very close, says Lim, who keeps the dog's ashes in an oak urn at home. No matter where I went, he went. Whatever I asked him to do, he did. He never complained. Sometimes we'd be working for long hours, searching hundreds of cars or trucks, and he'd just look at me like, what do you want me to do next? When there was talk of having a memorial for Sirius, Lim insisted that it would be held only after all the other memorials were done for the WTC casualties. I didn't want anyone to think that I put my dog above any of the victims of 9/11, says Lim. On April 24th, 2002, about 400 people plus 100 K-9 teams from all over the country attended a memorial service at Liberty State Park in New Jersey for the fallen Labrador. A dog run was later named in Sirius's honor at Kowski Plaza in Battery Park City near Ground Zero. He did the job like the rest of us and gave his life that day, says Lim. In my mind, he'll always be a hero. Lim eventually returned to work full-time, teaming up with the Black Labrador Retriever named Sprig until 2005, when Lim was promoted to sergeant and the dog was retired as the family pet. Lim, who was promoted to lieutenant in 2008, still works at the Port Authority facilities in New York and New Jersey. After 30 years on the force, he says, I will retire on my terms and not because of what some knucklehead from Afghanistan, referring to the Al-Qaeda leader Osama bin Laden, did to the World Trade Center. End.